Welcome, everyone. This is the first session of the organizing conference, planning the next system teach-ins in November. We're going to have a keynote panel, higher education in the fierce urgency of now. A lot to talk about there. But before we do, I want to say a little bit about the next system teach-ins in November. This is coming from the website, so if you haven't registered already for this process, please do. Imagine hundreds of thousands of people gathering in college campuses, community centers, union halls, and public spaces around the world, all taking up the challenge of building a next system that can sustain the kind of world we all deserve. This is what's planned this November 1st through 16th through the next system teach-ins. Together, we'll challenge a system that seems to be locked in a downward spiral, driving down living conditions, burning up the natural systems of the earth, devastating communities and economies, igniting resource wars, uprooting millions, and inciting hatred and authoritarianism. Why is this system on a path to collapse, and why does the system seem unable to correct itself? At these teach-ins, we will learn from many social movements working for the next system that is more democratic, sustainable, and just. We will study and foster the emerging alternatives, asking critically about their possibilities and limitations. How much of the workable next system is already there? And together we will take responsibility for system change, asking which paths are more likely to lead us to the kind of next system we most want. So with the next system teach-ins, we're going to learn from and link these struggles and alternatives together. Another world is possible, a next system is necessary, and this work is in your hands. Okay, so today's panel is Higher Education in the Fierce Agency of Now. Although the teach-ins won't only be occurring in higher education spaces, that is one place that we will be organizing. And it's a space with a lot of churn right now. So we're very fortunate today to have three panels, and I'm going to introduce each of them. And then they're going to give their talks. Unfortunately, Professor Anthony Cook from Georgetown Law Coalition for Racial Equity and Democratic Economy is unable to join us today, but we have three amazing presenters. First, we're going to hear from Dr. Bethany Letiecq, National Vice President of the American Association of University Professors, AFT Local 6741. She works on the utilization of community-based participatory action research approaches and anti-racist research methods. Following that, we're going to hear from Dr. Ben Manski, who's the Director of Next System Studies at George Mason University, who studies the participation of ordinary people in the deliberate constitution of their societies. And of course, Ben has been involved in a lot of this, leading us through this process. And third, we're going to hear from Dr. Stephanie Luce, the Professor of Labor Studies and Sociology at CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. And she studies questions of labor and has a new book, Practical Radicals, 7 Strategies to Change the World. So as you're listening, we're going to have them present, and then we're going to have a discussion. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A, and we will be able to address them as we go. So please, thank you so much for coming, and let's hand it over to you, Professor Letiecq.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be in community and in solidarity with people, particularly at this moment. I was asked, or my cue was to talk about what and who are behind the attacks on higher education. And I kind of want to go back and really understand a little briefly the roots or the history, starting with the billionaire industrialist Charles Koch, who in 1974 gave a speech, and I'm going to read a part of the speech here, and I quote that he said, "There are basically 4 ways in which the pro-capitalist businessman can fight for free enterprise: through education, through the media, by legal challenges, and by political action. I do maintain, however, that the educational route is both the most vital and the most neglected. We should cease financing our own destruction by supporting only those programs, departments, or schools that contribute in some way to our individual companies or to the general welfare of our free enterprise system. This was in 1974, and I believe it's important to understand how long this attack on higher education has been building. Um, the Koch network, alongside folks like Leonard Leo, then have set to work to build the infrastructure necessary to destroy public governance, the administrative or regulatory state, and really public life as we've come to know it. Mason is actually a key player in this mix. Charles Koch and Leonard Leo and their ilk, we say, have captured the law school, the econ department, and they are highly influential and fund greatly the Mercatus Center, the Institute for Humane Studies, and the Law and Economics Center. All of these entities have been an important part of the structure or strategy that this network has utilized to build to this moment. Of course, Charles Koch also funds a lot of ultra-conservative organizations, to include the Heritage Foundation. And I'm seeing in the chat, about Fred Koch. I did have a note here that, of course, Fred Koch, his father, was a co-founder of the John Birch Society, which was an ultra-conservative libertarian org that opposed civil rights. So yeah, this has been going on for quite some time. What we see currently emerging in this moment, in this sort of the ultra conservative sort of last gasp, or the white supremacist sort of last gasp at their clinging to power. What we see is this coming together of at least three groups. Certainly the libertarians, but also in concert with white Christian nationalists and the Trumpers, the MAGA cult, and you can see how this convergence of these various groups is then playing out in the attacks on higher education. So folks like Chris Rufo, I would put him in the white Christian nationalist camp, although he, can fit in several. But, he really was one of the founders of the anti-CRT movement that has now morphed into the anti-DEI movement. And, Isaac Kamola at the Center for the Defense of Academic Freedom, and Kimberly Crenshaw and others, Black legal scholars, scholars of critical race theory, like Victor Ray, also, they're very clear that these anti-DEI moves are really rooted in anti-Black racism, and really connect to that history of white supremacy. Certainly, anti-DEI also is inclusive of and affecting other groups, right? It's also anti-queer, anti-trans, anti-immigrant. The list goes on. But I think it's interesting to think about how that, as Kimberly Crenshaw would say, that anti-Black racism, that is the linchpin or the gateway that opens for all kinds of other groups to endure oppressive attacks. We've also seen here at Mason and around the country, as many of you know, this movement around anti-Semitism, and the use or the force of the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism to be utilized on campuses as a way to investigate or label people as anti-Semitic, and then take actions against them in all kinds of ways, to include disappearing people, deporting people, revoking people's statuses, their legal statuses, etc. At Mason, our board of visitors is just crawling with these individuals from the Heritage Foundation and other places that have all in this convergence. And so we're feeling it mightily here, like everywhere. We were forced to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism in our non-discrimination policy, and and faculty have been trying to push back against that. But we've also seen other things going on here on campus, like the execution of a no-knock warrant against students for justice in Palestine, who have since been essentially expelled from campus without any due process. Anyway, my point is we're seeing this group. They've come together and they are just hammering on all fronts, right? So whether it's anti-DEI, this anti-Semitism, anti-pro-Palestinian moves, anti-immigration, that now includes, again, international students, which has left many of us really kind of flat-footed to even think about how are we going to protect people who have status, have forms of legal status to protect them from threats of detention and deportation. And lastly, I'll just say that there's also all these anti-science moves, right? And also anti-reproductive justice moves, and the massive defunding. You can see all of this coming together, and it's really been shocking and in some ways expected, because we all knew about Project 2025 and the like, but it's also just like this constant drinking out of a fire hose. And I did want to end my comments here with some signs of fight as one of the leaders of the American Association of University Professors. There's quite a lot going on. There are legal battles that are being waged to try to push back on some of these anti or authoritarian moves. And while many universities have adopted this institutional neutrality concept of neutering or silencing the voices of leadership, there are signs of hope out there. And I'll conclude with a quote from Princeton's president, who said recently, speaking about these times, I think it requires a very firm commitment to principle and a willingness to do hard things. University presidents and leaders have to understand that the commitment to allow academics, including our faculty, including our students, to pursue the truth as best they see it is fundamental to what our universities do. He goes on to say we have to be willing to stand up for that. In principle, we have to be willing to speak up, and we have to be willing to say no to funding if it's going to constrain our ability to pursue the truth. And so while there's a lot, it's complicated, it's a well-planned long-term attack, and we're now in it. I hope we can also talk about all the ways in which coalitions are building to fight back and try to reclaim some of our ground. So I'll stop there, but thank you for letting me share a little bit.
Much appreciated. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Ben Manski, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bethany. And thank you for all the work and the putting yourself, on the line and fighting for higher education and academic freedom all these years. And I'll say that I am at George Mason University as well. I arrived here in 2020 in the midst of COVID, and pretty quickly came to understand that the reason why so many people know about the Koch brothers and know about GMU in particular and the relationship between the Koch brothers and George Mason University is that there were many people here who were involved in fighting for this public institution, graduate students, faculty, alum, and people in the community. And so we just really want to honor all the time and the hits that lots of people have taken for standing up for what a public institution and a democratic society should be. And as you just left off, Bethany, that's actually exactly where I intended to pick up, which is to say that this has been a long building strategy of corporatization and de-democratization, and it has come from a number of different directions that are overlapping. In my home state of Wisconsin, we dealt with the Bradley Foundation, the National Association of Scholars, the corporatization of research through the Bayh-Dole Act that sort of took off in the 80s into the 90s. And yet there's been resistance and there's been contention all along the way, right? But where we are right now, as you just said, is we've had this massive shift in terms of what higher education in the United States in particular, or we're going to be a little US centric with this panel with the exception of our Canadian cousin Lesley here. We're dealing with a situation where the same people who've been pushing this agenda have taken the federal state, have taken the national government, and they have unleashed an attack not only on DEI and on students of color and immigrants and on people standing up for human rights, but on the entire higher education sector. And so what I want to say about that, and this came up in a session yesterday in one of our smaller sessions yesterday, is that in some ways what that means about those of us who are raising questions of what universities and colleges and higher education should do around the systemic crises of our time, the people who are saying, hey, we need next system studies, we need universities to lean into these questions. We're not even on the front lines of this attack. The struggle has become involving physicists and economists and very mainstream and respected scholars, and I'll just mention earlier this week the statement of over 1,900 members of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, very explicitly describing this attack as an attack on science, on higher education as a sector, and calling for, although I don't think they used the phrase, a fight back. And that's a bit different. So what does that mean for the next system teach-ins, and what does that mean for next system studies? I think it means that we're not on our own, that there are many, many other scholars and members of academic communities and people who care about higher education, who care about democracy, who are suddenly finding themselves having to deal with next system questions too, and that's maybe a good place for us to be raising questions about where this world system is headed, and about what we all can do about it collectively. So for me, next system studies is about universities and colleges entering the fray. And when I say entering the fray, I mean entering the fray on the side of ordinary people. And I mentioned Wisconsin once, and I'm sure I'll mention Wisconsin twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times today. But in Wisconsin, as a matter of state law, it's in statute, there's something that's called the Wisconsin idea, which is that the boundaries of the university are the borders of the state. And the Wisconsin idea at its heart is the idea that the University of Wisconsin system has an obligation to stand on the side of ordinary people and to help people to become ever more empowered members of a democratic society, and to take on poverty and to open up the airwaves to the people. And so what that means in practice is that at times the University of Wisconsin system has been very active in the daily lives of people who are not living and breathing, who are not spending their time on university campuses, right? The university is everywhere. And is at people's side. So that's the spirit with which we have taken building next system studies here at GMU, and that's the spirit that I think the next system teach-ins are about. And I'll come back to the relationship between next system teach-ins and next system studies when I close. But in terms of next system studies, if you take seriously the obligation of academic institutions to support community and to support democracy and equity and ecology. In other words, if you think that there are always some kinds of normative biases to the decisions to research certain questions and not others, to form partnerships with certain kinds of organizations and communities and not others, then and if you think that we're supposed to live in a democratic society, let's just stay with that word, with democracy, then the question that sits on your shoulders and is whispering in your ear and maybe guiding your vision is the question of how we as students and faculty and staff and universities can do our utmost to help people to live in a democratic society, to create one. And that's really what Next System Studies is about. So we built a program in Next System Studies at George Mason University. We are in our 4th year. We're just finishing our 4th year of this program. And it's one approach to building the study of the next system. And in building a program, you not only do the same kinds of things that other academic programs do, bringing in speakers and setting up research programs and designing courses, but you actually have to deal with the question of what your theory of the field is. What is this field really about? And I've had to deal with that in particular because I've been teaching courses. And so I've developed an approach to Next System Studies that involves 4 sets of questions. And these are questions that have to do with the nature of systemic crises, which I define as crises which, if unaddressed, will mean that the system collapses, right? It has to do with questions that have to do with the question of system design. How is the system designed? What are the configurations of institutions and practices and people and beings that operate within the system? It has to do with questions of systemic movements, which is to say, questions dealing with social movements that are actually trying to change the system itself. A really developed social movement tends to become systemic in that sense. And it has to do with questions of system change, which is to say, how does one system become another one? And in social sciences, historically or traditionally, that's involved the study of revolutions or social transformation, and then increasingly reconstruction as a kind of pathway. So that's what Next System Studies has been about, is studying those questions, but not those sets of questions in isolation, but actually how they relate to each other. How do we understand the relationship between systemic movements and systemic crises? When does something become a systemic crisis? Who declares it, as Naomi Klein and others have said, right? And there's lots of questions. It's actually proving a really great framework for building this field. But what I want to emphasize right now is the importance of systemic movements and recognizing that movements that are trying to change the system, they don't have all the answers, but they have a lot of answers. You have many, many people who are engaged in trying to figure out how to build a different kind of system, what it will take, what the pathways to system change might be. We're trying to understand the nature of the crises of the system that we're experiencing. We're trying to articulate alternative designs for a next system. Who are trying to figure out what it takes to build a systemic movement that will change the system, that's not just against the system, but for some other kind of system. So I want to invite everybody here to check out our work at nextsystem.gmu.edu to get a sense of what we've been doing at Mason, and also to join with us and many others who are here today who are organizing the Next System Teach-ins, because the Next System Teach-in process is a way for us to build relationships, learn from each other, and lay the foundations for Next System Studies internationally. And I just want to thank everybody for taking the time and putting the effort in at this stage. And a couple of years from now, I predict that there'll be many, many more of us if we're part of this work together.
Thank you so much, Ben. And a reminder to audience, please feel free to put questions into the chat. I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie, please.
Right. Thanks so much. This is really great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And my comments are going to echo a lot of what Bethany and Ben already said, but my job is to talk a bit about how to think about higher ed in this moment of crisis. And we have these attacks coming from all angles right now. Some of them are manufactured to make us confused and to make us feel demoralized, but a lot of these crises are real. And so why do we want to continue thinking about higher ed in the context of this big crisis? And I want to talk about some reasons why higher ed remains a key site of struggle. And I think first, just going off of some of the attacks that Bethany talked about, we know from history that when authoritarian or fascist regimes come in, higher ed is often one of their first places they go to attack. They attack unions and they attack higher education. Why is that? Because these are the spaces of independent thought, of fact-checking, of rigorous thinking and scientific inquiry. And these are a real threat to authoritarian regimes. And so it's no surprise that we see within this first few weeks of the Trump administration, these serious attacks on higher ed. But, and if you look at voting patterns around the world, you'll see that people with college degrees are far less supportive of these authoritarian candidates. And so they understand that. They understand the threat that comes from the higher ed setting. But of course, it's not just authoritarians. As Bethany said, these attacks have come from other arenas. If you've heard about the Powell memo, related to the era when Koch was 1974. Well, in 1971, Lewis Powell, who was a corporate lawyer and then Supreme Court Justice, wrote this now infamous Powell memo, where he talked about the attack on capitalism and the attack on our American way of life. And he said, where is this coming from? One of the places it's coming from is the universities. He talked about a chilling description of what's being taught at the universities. And this was their call for the business community to unite as a class and infiltrate the universities, go into the universities and stop the tide of independent thinking and stop the tide of protest. And it's not just from the conservatives, it's not just from the Republicans. We've seen real attacks on freedom of speech, on the right to protest from the Democratic Party as well, particularly last year in the protests around Palestine. And in blue states and blue cities like my own here in New York City, we had attacks on students and faculty and staff, right to protest and right to study what we want and say what we want and protest injustices. So while the university has been home to radical thought, it's a contested space. And we want to, we don't want to romanticize higher ed, right? It's an important space. It's a space we have to fight for, but we've always had to fight for that, right? And even historically, universities have really been very hierarchical. They've maintained the status quo. They've pushed to keep marginalized people out and they've excluded. But we've fought for and we've won spaces to study, spaces to hire and create new disciplines and new departments. We've fought for access to the universities, and we have to keep up that fight. So right now we're in this really strange situation. We're in a situation in which we actually have to work with our administrators that we often fight against to defend even the right to exist as higher ed. We have to enter in kind of an uneasy alliance, a united front of sorts with some in the business community and some in other aspects of society we don't normally work with, but we are united around this common fight to defend higher ed. And then within that, we need to maintain our movements that are not just defensive, but that are forward thinking, that are not just about today's fight and tomorrow's fight, which are absolutely necessary and crucial, but to say, what is the universities we deserve and we need to build a just society? What do we want the university to look like in 5 years and 10 years? And for that, we need to think about what are the values and principles to unite around and the broad swath of stakeholders. Now, the right wing is presenting the university as this very elitist institution. It's just for, rich kids and snooty professors and, East Coast liberals or whatever. But we know the university of the future can be a broadly inclusive space. It involves people from all swaths of ideological spectrum, from all swaths of society, and a space to really debate ideas and have, generative conflict about how the world should look and what the next system should look like. So one way to do this is to adopt what we could call a bargaining for the common good approach. And when I was at the University of Massachusetts, where I taught for 10 years, I was active in my faculty librarian union. We were really frustrated at the ways in which the administration was siloing the university community. They would tell us, okay, faculty, if you want higher salary, that's going to mean higher tuition. If you want smaller class sizes, it means students can't get the classes they want. So all of these things, we were being pitted against one another. And we understood that we could only win by uniting, by bringing students, parents, alumni, faculty, staff, and the broader community together to fight for a vision of a just university. And so we formed a network called the Public Higher Education Network of Massachusetts that went across the state. And we were uniting around 5 broad principles: the principles of fully funding the university, free higher ed, accessible higher ed, fully staffed higher ed, and democratic universities. And for each of those, we had our long-term demands, like we were demanding free higher ed, but we also understood we needed short-term demands, such as, more expanding of grants, scholarships, and free community college. And we also knew as a faculty union, we're like, every year we're being forced, or not forced to, but we come into these situations where we have to endorse the candidate for governor, and we throw a bunch of money at him, and then he spends it on TV ads and mailers. Why don't we withhold some of those donations and instead hire organizers, and instead build this network where we're talking to people one-on-one and building an organization that is about defending higher ed rather than putting our money into political consultants or politicians. And so this network, Phenom, it still exists today. We've won quite a bit. And we still, I say we, even though I left, now I'm at CUNY instead of UMass, but the principle still stands, which is we can build these broader networks of uniting around values of what a higher education system should look like. Now, right now, for me to say, let's fight for free higher ed and accessible and democratic higher ed sounds very pie in the sky. It sounds absurd. I understand that in the context of what we're facing. So that's not to say, we can necessarily win that today, but we have to maintain our daily fights to defend the university as a whole, but still stay focused on that long-term vision and insist that the university is a public good, whether it's a private or public university, it is a public good. And it is the source of space for generating the big ideas and dreams that we need to build the next system. And so I would leave with that. It's one of the spaces, it's not the only space, but we defend it for that special role it plays in society. And not to romanticize university in general, we know it's contested space, but we can in fact fight for a better university and one that is a foundation of the next system. Thank you.
Amazing. One of my questions earlier, yes, big applause. This was going to be about building in the community piece, and there you go. There's a model there. So please, thank you, all of you. Now, please put your questions in the chat. One of the questions, well, I had a couple of questions just to start us off. There's a lot of discussion around academic freedom as a real focus, and I'm curious about, is there a tension there with that as the center of organizing, given the much broader set of issues that you're speaking about? I don't know if that kind of resonates with anyone. I'm also curious about the role of students and how you're seeing that in this. I don't know who wants to.
Yeah, I can jump in, because we've been talking a lot about academic freedom, and I actually get to teach this wonderful class right now called Critical Praxis in Education, and it's actually about how students can take their critical theorizing and put it to action. And so we do some strategic planning and some engagement and action taking, and it's really fun. And we've built a campaign this semester that was about academic freedom, because graduate students right now who came to the university are like, hey, we want to study critical issues around race and gender and sexuality, sexual orientation, et cetera, immigration rights. And now we are feeling constrained, right? Now we don't know, can we actually pursue our doctoral studies, and our faculty actually going to support us, or are people going to engage in anticipatory obedience and start really delimiting what knowledge creation is acceptable in this moment. And so, in talking about academic freedom, though, the students were sort of like, well, that's obviously not a well-known concept, right? If you're organizing means you're having to find terms, that's very challenging. So they came up with a campaign that we're actually just about to launch as a part of our April 17th National Day of Action work. And part of it is very simple. We're asking people to hang a poster that says, I commit to protecting your rights to teach, to learn, to research, and to be here without fear or favor. Commit, join, act. This is our movement. And we're so excited because we think it's really basic, but it is inclusive of all groups of people who are under attack. But it also presents us with a pivot to, as Stephanie was saying, sort of, what are our principles and what do we want to fight for? And what's the vision for the future of our democracy, of this, building and fighting for this multiracial, intersectional democracy that is inclusive. And so I'm afraid I'm going to start trailing off from the question, Lesley. So I will stop there. But I think, there's a lot of energy there, and we're really excited, to pursue this.
That seems super smart to really just kind of use it as a lever into a much broader vision. Anyone else
We'll
want to?
see.
Yeah, right? Well, because I think, Stephanie, you raised the point. I mean, I'm active in my faculty union, and we're often engaged in fighting the administration, and we don't want to end up defending institutions that weren't really serving the community's needs in the way that Ben was speaking about there. So, I mean, models, I think, are very helpful for us to think beyond that situation. Ben, did you have
Yeah, I
something?
do. I'd like to hear Stephanie, but I'm sure I'll go and then I'd like to hear from you. So I think when I think back to those struggles at the University of Wisconsin system at the end of what became the University of Wisconsin system at the end of the 19th century into the early 20th century, and what was happening in terms of the poisoning of consumers and the corporatization of business and the corporatization of agriculture and the things that people in society, working people were dealing with at that time, and then the things that some faculty at UW-Madison were dealing with at that time. A lot of it had to do with the quest for truth and for reliability, right? I mean, the things that science is supposed to be about. And I think that from the standpoint of people who are not in academia or who are distant from academia, there is that is really the real value of academic freedom, right? Is the idea that maybe we have some set of institutions in society that can help us to find something that is reliable, that we can trust in our lives. And in this era, above any previous era, I think that is something that people are searching for more than in the past. So I think that, for me, in terms of the fight for academic freedom, I think it is actually about not ourselves, but about our duties to society as well. In terms of the question about students, I think it's very important for all of us to recognize that the student movement in the United States was under concerted attack for decades, and that attack was largely successful, and that we are all paying the price for that. That control of student fees by student associations came under attack through the 1990s, and that students have much less political power than they used to have. And that less than a decade ago, the National Student Association, the United States Student Association, collapsed due to neglect in part and a lack of support from so-called progressive philanthropy and from, frankly, the labor movement. Is a real mistake for unions. I think that the student movement had not been invested in as something that was important in its own right. But what I think is positive is that the United States Student Association is being refounded. There were many critiques of that organization over the years, but it played an increasingly important role even as it was coming under greater attack. And so it's important that USSA is out there, and it's important. We'll be hearing from Jasmine Banks in the next panel. It's important for us to connect with and support efforts to organize students across campuses. So that's pivotal. And I think the next system teaching process could really help with that quite a bit. I think we could really help to rejuvenate the student movement and to make sure that resources are going to the student movement, so that the student movement can play the role that historically it played, which was as part of the base of the broader social movement.
Excellent.
I was going to make some similar comments to Ben about the attack on student organizing. And the other piece of that too is obviously, like, as the cost of tuition has gone up, a lot more students have to work full time and they don't have the same kind of anchor on the campus that they used to. And then it also makes the risks of getting thrown out or penalized for protesting much higher when you're spending so much on your education. So our fights to keep education affordable are also, helpful in terms of helping create the foundations for the student activism. I think another thing that we should think about too is what I think of as a victory, but a slight loss of, like, a lot of students, they fought for, in the 60s and 70s, they fought for more space in the university. We created labor studies programs, women's studies, Black studies, and that was great. That's a victory. But it also began to professionalize and create this somewhat of a division between the thinkers and the doers, and that the academic and intellectual work taking place in these departments wasn't happening as much like on the shop floor or in the union meeting. And so I think as we rebuild these movements, we want to make that more fluid, that the intellectual work is in the university and in the workplace and in the community organizing space, and vice versa. Like in other countries, it's more seamless, the intellectual space and the organizing space. And I think we want to be conscious about doing that in this rebuild. And then finally, I would say that another bright spot is the growth of student organizing in terms of unionization, in terms of both grad students and undergrads unionizing in their universities. And that's a growing area of organizing. And that's also one for us to encourage and support.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I'm really interested in seeing, what are the ways that we can encourage people to be brave at this moment, because I think there is a lot of fear in the academy, for obvious and important reasons, right? So how do we build that in terms of the strategy? I'm getting a couple of questions in the chat asking, are there plans to preemptively address possible efforts to prevent the teach-ins by administrations and their funders? And what began, another one from Greg, what began as peace studies programs on campuses was co-opted and became conflict management studies. So indeed, that's just more of a comment than a question. Does anyone have a sense of how to encourage the bravery, and also how to be prepared to defend the next systems teach-ins?
I jumping in. I was at a meeting recently with Jason Stanley and Tim Snyder, two experts on authoritarianism and fascism, and Tim had something that really resonated with me is that what's the antidote of fear? And I've actually been trying to read up more on how do you manage your fear in these moments, and he talked about not getting stuck in the narrative, right, that is being created on the right, that mainly on the right, and constructing new narratives and engaging in obviously joy, creativity, collectivity, and we were remarking that even the Tesla campaign is this organic, sort of fun movement that's having a real impact, and I guess that's a part of what I'm trying to hold on to is just not losing my joy and the pleasure of organizing in solidarity with others, and there's still these tensions and stuff. And I think in some ways you alluded to this, that when these groups of studies became professionalized, it also sort of moved into, in some ways, sometimes competition, or whether we lost some solidarity, and we see obviously this sort of infighting or challenges, real challenges within organizing solidarity movements, and I'm hopeful that we can ground ourselves in the principles that you spoke to, and the principles that bind us together around the value of higher education, thinking, reimagining who we're in solidarity with to include people who we might not have been in solidarity with in the past, and I'm really trying to come at this with a renewed sense of just creativity and joy and love and passion, and not cede those emotions to fear.
Mm. Yeah, good point. I mean, I'm curious about examples of, I mean, a shared enemy, it does have a certain power, right? Of administrations being like, okay, yeah, we have to lean into this vision, right? Because this is an important thing. And it's not just about, I know that even though the various nefarious actors are going to see, professors are just defending their well-paid jobs. Like, that's not the struggle here, right? This is defense of the common good.
Yeah, on the fear, so one of the strategies we talk about in the Practical Radicals book is actually thinking of collective care as a strategy. It isn't always, like sometimes it is, just human nature and what we're doing to take care of one another. But recognizing this fact that the fear is real and the human needs are real, and that people can take that risk if they know someone has their back. If you know someone is going to be there with legal support, childcare support, food, whatever it might be, that enables you to have a little bit more courage to take that risk, it's more likely you can do so. The fear is real. There's no way of like eliminating the source. But when we support each other through collective organizations and institutions, it helps people think of them, like understand their role in history and how people before them have taken much bigger risks or very big risks, and people in the future will be taking those risks. And you're part of a lineage of people willing to step forward with that courage and do what's right in the moment, and with someone having your back.
I love that. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's most exciting to me about the Next Systems teach-ins is that you think about people doing this sort of care work and mutual aid projects in housing and yesterday we were talking about ecological relations and thinking about how do those models play out in the university space? What can we learn from those sort of areas of organizing to help to make the learning processes better? We just have a few more minutes. Do we have any kind of burning questions in the audience, or do we want to kind of do a final round?
Well, I can take up the question about where a field like Next System Studies might end up that has been raised there. And there was a question about whether there have been any efforts to prevent the teach-ins from happening. And as I said in the chat, none that I'm aware of. That doesn't mean that there aren't conversations. Certainly some of the people that Bethany mentioned earlier in your remarks are aware of Next System Studies, and they are aware that we are here at GMU. But they haven't chosen to pick this fight, and it might be that they won't choose to pick this fight, or it might be that they do choose to pick it at some point. And I think that my view on that is that we have a lot of room to build. We have a lot of relationships to build. We have lots of partnerships here at George Mason University with the county and with community organizations and with unions and with independent businesses, and those are important in terms of our stake in what happens in Northern Virginia and our leaning in to help convene and to build, a next system in Northern Virginia that works for and is designed by the people who live here. But it also helps for the university to have people who are invested in this university more and who have a stake in this university that, after all, belongs to them. So I guess we'll find out. In terms of the question of what happened with the third world liberation movement, third world studies, women's studies, Chicano studies, Black studies, African American studies, peace studies, labor studies, social work, sociology, all these fields have come out of the intersection of social movements and people within academia. So people who were parts of the movement, who were within the academy, right? The movements don't happen just outside academic boundaries. And so my conclusion from studying the history of the formation of those fields that were intended in various ways to be emancipatory, to free people, in the words of Eric Wright, that they end up settling where the movement from below and a movement from above meet. And so it's not so much that peace and conflict studies are co-opted. It's that there was actually a meeting of interests between sections of the state and ruling class and the global peace movement, that is where that set of fields has settled. And the same thing has happened in other areas. So for next system studies to be very optimistic, it's going to be necessary for us to build next system studies in the kind of way that you're describing, Stephanie. We're just very conscious of that dynamic. And I have had corporate executives and people coming out of tech firms and so on approaching me because they're interested. They see the system is in crisis, and there will be people who see that we need a next system that's better and who may share common values. So it's something where we need to involve lots and lots of people who are not elites in this process. And I think that's the way that we address that problem that Greg raised. So I guess that could also be my closing comments here.
Perfect. Bethany, Stephanie, do you want to?
Just in sort of closing, I'm in trying to think optimistically about what is growing out of this current moment. And one quick thing that I'm excited about. There are all these advocacy chapters, these AAUP advocacy chapters across the country. There are several hundred of them. These are pre-majoritarian unions, right? They're people who have come together to fight for academic freedom, shared governance, and really good governance on our campuses in both private, public, small, large campuses. And what's been very interesting, when the American Association of University Professors affiliated with the American Federation of Teachers, AFT, we were all put into one big local. So we are now local 6741. And you mentioned at the top that that's what I'm the vice president of, is this new thing. And we are mobilizing with resources and support from both the AFT and the AAUP to support the growth of these advocacy chapters, to build into something, right? To be an organizing, collaborative, coalition building space. And there are just a lot of exciting initiatives coming out of that. We now are just in conversation. There are over 11,000 of us, of members in this local. And so it presents itself with just another organizing body to think about, envision, what is the future. And I'm actually on a panel tomorrow where we're going to be talking about these pre-majoritarian unions and what they can bring right now creatively with power building, that are also potentially unconstrained by collective bargaining units that are under contract, and it's sort of a different beast. And what we can do to support mobilizing across the country. And so I'm really excited, and I'll close with just, you all know there are tons of things coming up, tons of days of action starting, tomorrow there's a big day of action. Hopefully it doesn't rain too bad. There's April 8th. Is another big rally in DC. And I mentioned already, April 17th, the National Day of Action is an AUP supported event, but it's really a grassroots movement that cuts across all sectors, to include the Debt Collective, HELU, Higher Education Labor Union, and many others. And we have some 50 universities who are demonstrating or taking some actions. And so there's a lot going on. And I just encourage everybody to plug in where they can and do what they can to be together right now. And good luck out there. And thank you for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Bethany.
Stephanie. Yeah, and another one on that is May Day, which I'm putting a website in the chat. The Chicago Teachers Union has convened a national call, a national gathering of labor union leaders, community organizations, tenant rights, immigrant rights, to revive the historic role of May Day in our country and around the world. It's an international day of solidarity. And so seeing this as a moment to bring together all of these diverse interests to engage in actions, not just for that day, but beyond. And I guess I would just conclude by saying, we in higher ed have, we're under attack, but we have resources and we have something to offer this movement at this time. We have experts in different fields. We have data. We have meeting spaces in some cases. We have unions and organizations. And I think we have to continue the defensive fight, but we need to take the space to go on the offense and make ourselves a resource to bring together these movements. Some of these fights we're being forced into, like when students are being abducted, that's bringing together the university higher ed fight with immigrant rights, with Palestine rights, international rights. So we are in this fight, whether we like it or not, we're stronger together. And I think higher ed plays and can play a really crucial role in this moment.
I can't think of a better way to end this. Thank you so much, Stephanie, Bethany, and Ben. Our next panel, I've given everybody give an applause if you can figure out how to give an applause with the Zoom. This is an inspiring and exciting time. I think the next panel will be starting in just a few minutes, and it's what a next system teach-in looks like. Okay, we're good. So take a bio break and be right back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
We'll begin at the top of the hour. And thanks so much, Lesley, for your excellent facilitation and sharing of the session too. Lesley Wood, professor of sociology, read her books on social movements at York in Toronto.